Hi, 2000 was a pretty good year, but 2001? Well, ladies and gentlemen, why don't you see for yourself? Max Payne. Who doesn't know Max Payne? I mean, it may not be the most ambitious, most graphically rich game out there, but boy oh boy, was it fun. It's a third-person perspective action shooter built from ground up to turn all, even the most plain-feeling shootouts into movie-like scenes, looking dramatically and hella fun. And you know what? The gameplay is hella fun too, and it's all based around the bullet time effect that was pioneered by The Matrix and that stormed its way into dozens of copycat movies after and quite a few games too. Max Payne being one of them. Well, one of the most successful and well put together ones, but one of them nonetheless. The narrative and the story is nothing new or especially creative, it's not complicated whatsoever, and most of all, nothing you'd get lost in. It's a simple tale of revenge, told in a most basic way possible, and dressed in a non-stop action sequences galore, making all the truth be told senseless killings oh so fun. While the story told via comic book pages seems that dark, you'll soon enough realize that other than that, the game is a parody of all the cliches of the revenge genre and references many classic movies all throughout its run. Action is all that Max Payne is about, and it's that action that makes it such a fun and amazing game to dive into, to let some steam off and spread bullet-delivered eternal Z's to countless enemies. While there are areas you can explore around the game's world, the stages are very linear and all of them have one and just one way to progress further, meaning that you won't get lost and that as long as you put your heart to it, there's no way for you to not complete the game. And good, cause that's what it was made for, to let you relax, unwind after a long and stressful day, having fun and not engaging your brain too much in it all. Story-wise, Max once used to be a police officer in NYC. On one of those terrible, menacing days, however, three junkies broke into his home and murdered his wife and a newborn daughter in cold blood. Well, they were high as the skyscraper, but that's not a valid justification of the terrible deed. Max was left heartbroken, powerless, and oh so very angry. I mean, his face permanently shifted into a grin that I can only describe as mid-poop push look. Still, given all the terrible things that had happened to him, he didn't lose it, he kept his cool and carried on living. He quit the force though and joined the Drug Enforcement Administration, all with hopes of getting drugs off the streets and preventing future similar tragedies from ever happening again. I'd probably lose it if it happened to me and hulk out on all parties responsible, but I'm not Max, so here you go, he was a bigger man. A virtual one perhaps, but bigger nonetheless. 3 years later, during a raid on a mafia drug compound, Max's best friend and partner, fellow DEA agent Alex, is killed and Max is blamed for it. Hunted by the law and mafia alike, Max finally loses it and decides to go out on a high note, guns blazing, shooting anything and anyone that comes between him and his long overdue revenge. Worms World Party is a follow-up to Worms Armageddon and nearly as good of a game. So what is Worms? I'm assuming you're not a gamer and this video is your first experience with gaming. Well, at least PC offshoot of gaming. Why? Because you're asking me about Worms. Oh, I would have sworn that you did. Either way, I'm gonna tell that dude sitting next to you what it's all about, cause he looks like he'd never heard of it. Let's call him Mike, okay? So Mike, Worms is a side-view turn-based video gaming definition of a multi-person fun. It pits between 2 and 4 players competing against each other in an artillery/scorched earth-like shootouts. Each of them, be it human or CPU controlled, has their own team of worms and a whole plethora of different weapons to choose from to deliver death from close and afar. And these weapons can be something as obvious as an Uzi, bazooka or even grenades, but also stuff that you'd never thought that it could be used in combat, like sheep, banana bombs or holy hand grenades. Well, come to think of it, that last one's place is definitely in combat. You know, pray first, explode the opposing worms later kind of a combat. Anyway, the environments are beautiful and detailed, featuring their own themes and randomized layouts. But what's most important about them is that they're destructible, so the map keeps changing throughout each fight with each next attack. And what you see at the round start and what you end up with are usually polar opposites. First being a beautiful, colorful location full of life, and second, a post-apocalyptic wasteland composed out of few tiny pieces of land suspended over deep and deadly depths of water. Oh, since I'm on the water, or a subject of water to be precise, it's not always necessary to shoot or explode the opponents, throwing them into water may be as, if not more viable tactics, especially that it's easier to use an explosion-caused shockwave to send few of them to their demise that way than force of that explosion to straight up kill them. Anyway, the rounds are timed, and when the time runs out, the game enters sudden death, and each turn the water level raises, consuming worms that fail to find higher and safer ground. The truth is, whichever Worms game you pick, this, earlier or later, you'll have as much fun. And if you manage to find someone to play it against, that's easily an afternoon of laughs and time well spent. So be it this, or Armageddon, or whichever else you manage to get hold of version of the game, you'll love it. That said, if you do have Armageddon already, there's no need for you to get this one. Everything that you could want from a Worms game is there already, and the changes of Slippery Ground, Force Mode and a few other small tweaks that the World Party brought are not worth the extra money. Papyrus were the masters of racing in the late 90s, and it seems that they were no worse in the early 2000s. Nascar Racing 4, upon its release, was the best, most feature-packed and realistic NASCAR game to ever hit PC. You could say that it's an iterative upgrade over the earlier entries, cause it is, but by god, this iteration made the difference. All of the tracks from 2000 season were included, even the Daytona one omitted in some earlier entries, the drivers are too, and are mostly driving appropriate for them cars, though the editor is included if you'd like to fiddle around with who's driving what and what not. And the realism options are just incredible. If you switch them all to the max, the car will behave like the real one does and respond to the damage it will sustain the way it should. So huge collisions will result in a lot of debris, wrecks in various stages of destruction, some of them still barely driving, others, well, let's say that not all cars that got into the races have to complete them, and small damages to different parts of the vehicle as you keep driving may get worse and worse and eventually affect not only that particular part of the car, but its overall performance or handling too. They may even spread if the connecting parts rely on the one that was affected. The AI drivers are no slouches either and provide a demanding challenge, especially as you play the game for the first time and for whatever the reason decide to set the realism to max, cause getting used to and mastering the controls may take days before you'll be able to face the other drivers on even ground. Fortunately, for gamers such as myself who suck at simulations, there's always the arcade racing mode, and it lets me jump in and have fun basically from the get-go. If you enjoyed the earlier games in the series, this one's better than all of them combined. Aliens vs Predator 2 is a superb first-person shooter and a follow-up to its good first game. Same as in the original, it allows you to play a campaign as either of three species included, so Colonial Marines, Alien or Predator, with each of them having different set of weapons, skills and abilities, and even the interface and gameplay mechanics. Playing as a Marine is like playing any other sci-fi themed shooter, meaning you're a human, you have access to a set of sci-fi inspired but familiar looking and working weapons, and you face the other two species, with Alien being the ones you fight against the most. Aliens have no access to weapons, and they have claws and teeth and the tail too. What they lack in weaponry range, they more than make up in mobility, speed and stealth, so they can run around walls and ceilings, they are much faster than the other species and can lay brutal and devastating surprise attacks. So, even though they are an easy kill from range in open terrain, up close they're the deadliest of all of the three races. They can decapitate opponents to regain health too, which you know, is always fun. And finally, the Predator is just that. He's alone, with no support or backup, but he's also a hunter and he wouldn't have it any other way. Whenever he enters the room, it's the other species that become the prey. He operates a very strong even if non-changeable weapons, has many different view modes, invisibility cloak and huge as balls, fearing nothing and no one. Whenever he steps in any room, it's clear that he's there to make all the other races his bitches. I may have went a bit too far here, but he's the big bad guy and he knows it. And so should you. The story places you in a research facility belonging to Weyland-Yutani Corporation on the planet LV-1201, where the aliens were discovered. They were contained and studied by the humans for quite a while, you know, definitely for all the right reasons, nudge, but as in most situations like this one, eventually they managed to escape and then performed a species cleansing on the station, killing anyone and everyone on it. The distress signal is sent out, and both human and predator vessels pick it up, and both of the ships head to LV-1201 for perhaps totally different reasons, but both end up in equally as big of a mess. Blade of Darkness is a third-person perspective medieval fantasy action-adventure game with some very superficial RPG elements. And if I was to summarize it in one sentence, I'd say it's a game that paved the way for all the future Souls-likes. It features 4 different characters that you can play as: Tukaram the Barbarian, Naglfar the Dwarf, Sargon the Knight and Zoe the Amazon. I've not said that before, so I will now, but I always found Zoe to be a very nice sounding name. Anyway, each of these characters has their own fighting style, skills, strengths and weaknesses, and even starting location. And the game is very combat focused, putting a lot of attention on fast reflexes, precise attacks and effective defense. Given that there's literally hundreds of weapons in Blade of Darkness and that your character learns new skills along his or her adventure, you will always have a wide range of attacks to master, and if you manage to, the game can feel really rewarding. But that will take time and repetition, as same as most Souls-likes. Blade of Darkness is a really punishing kind of a title, and one that's definitely not among my faves. I have plenty difficult life, don't put me in my place too. Funny enough, however, the more you play, get used to the controls and learn moves, the easier Blade of Darkness will be, and the late game is less demanding than the first half. There's plenty of gore, dismemberments and brutal killing in Blade of Darkness, so if you're someone of a weaker heart or just don't find such brutal games fun, better steer clear from it. The presentation and especially graphics in this one, with physics and shadows being particular highlights, is just fantastic, and it looked at least a couple of years ahead of its time when it released. But while it's all nice and dandy, given how many combat encounters you'll be in, you'll barely find time to admire how Blade of Darkness looks like, and will be more focused on keeping your character alive, which is easier said than done. The levels are rather big, huge one might say, so if you're into games that are content-rich, vast and demanding, it's definitely one to keep on your radar. The forces of darkness are back, and while they've been slain and chased away by the hero called by the sorceress Ilana years before, they're stronger than ever now and aim to conquer all of the world. 4 Braves answer the call to arms and vow to destroy the darkness once and for all. It's perhaps not a great background story, but it's also one that's good enough for this game. So if it sounded like something you'd like to try, there's no better time than now to give Blade of Darkness a go. Anachronox is a very cinematic and story-rich Western JRPG. Yes, you've heard that right, a Western JRPG. It is much less combat-focused than your typical JRPG like Final Fantasy though, and puts its attention on RPG in the JRPG, if you get my drift. There are tons of different side quests and dialogues with colorful and interesting NPCs in Anachronox, and they make up a huge chunk of gameplay, especially the latter, as it's essentially a save the universe from distraction/detective story, so searching for hints and clues, where to go and what to do next, is more than crucial. You'll often need to use your special skills or think out of the box to solve quests, so they'll hardly ever feel boring or repeatable, and will keep you entertained throughout Anachronox's entire run. The enemies are not random, neither in their placement or kind, so you won't be unpleasantly surprised being attacked out of the blue in the middle of a random field while picking flowers and enjoying the summer breeze, like you could be in a generic JRPG. And no, I'm not laying bricks here on the genre, it's just Anachronox that's so surprisingly good. The combat is turn-based, using skills and magic for attacks, and you can also move around the battlefield a little, which is a fresh take on the formula. While you start your adventure alone, soon enough you'll meet and enlist many other companions, and they play a much more important than just combat or cosmetic role in your party, all having their own character, reasons and destiny in Anachronox's world. I mean, one of them is a planet, and I shit you not, you've heard that right, I said a planet. The story is just great. I mean, it's not the most imaginative thing you've heard, but you're old, you've heard it all, so just keep in mind that the writing is fantastic. It's interesting, involving, it paces itself perfectly, knows exactly when to go serious and when to take a piss. In fact, the self-parody thing will resurface more than once, and going through Anachronox's adventure is a pure delight. It's basically set in a far-off future when we travel to the stars and centered around saving of the universe. So you're Sly Boots, a PI who's down on his luck and barely making ends meet. What's more, you've amassed a huge debt and there are people wanting their money back pronto. So, when a mysterious rich man turns up with a too good to be true offer, rather than realizing that they most of the time are too good to be true, I mean, you accept it, just to get yourself intertwined in a much bigger mystery. If you love adventure games or RPGs, preferably both, then Anachronox may be your next most favorite retro discovery. I could say that Schizm Mysterious Journey is a missed clone and be done with it. But if I did, then I'd be doing 2 things I don't wanna do. First of all, I would be lazy, and more lazy than I usually am. And secondly, and more importantly, I'd be doing this game a disservice, as if I'm to be honest, while essentially, at least mechanics-wise, it's very similar to its older progenitor, I find Schizm to be much more fun game. As painfully difficult as Myst was, but more fun nonetheless. In a distant future, a mysterious planet Argilus is discovered. What's so mysterious about it, you may wonder? Well, it seems to be fully developed, but completely empty, devoid of any intelligent life that may be responsible for said development. All the expeditions sent out to figure out the phenomenon suddenly went silent and disappeared off the proverbial radar, leaving only traces of vague messages speaking of large organic and habitable vessels floating aimlessly in space. Your task is naturally to travel to Argilus and figure it all out. Unlike Myst, however, in Schizm you play as two characters, Hannah and Sam, and you can switch between them at will and will have to utilize both of their skills, sometimes at the same time, to solve many of the game's puzzles. Puzzles which are delightfully unique, fresh and different from one another. They are rather difficult, but if you give them time, think about where they are, what they are and what you know, most can eventually be solved without the use of a walkthrough. Some of them can be solved in place, others may require interaction with objects in different places or use of both characters at once. And there are also these that cannot be completed straight up and demand that you figure out many different ones first to uncover their solutions. Did I mention that the game was tough yet? Anyway, fortunately, they're never the let's add something difficult for the sake of being difficult kind of puzzles, and if you do your homework, read and watch everything that you find, you will be able to beat most of them, and more importantly, understand why you need to solve them the way you do, rather than banking on trial and error. Schizm released on 5 CDs and a DVD, and that latter version is just fantastic. It wouldn't be far off from the truth if I said that at the time of its release it may have been the best looking game on the market. But that's something that does not always stand the test of time. I'm happy to say that while not cutting edge anymore, Schizm presentation is still rather pleasant to the eye and the game can be enjoyed today as much as it did in 2001. If you like difficult adventure games, especially those similar to Myst, you'll love Schizm. So make sure to give it a go. Moto Racer 3. First Moto Racer was a dream come true at the time of its release, as it was unquestionably the best PC motorcycle racing game ever made, and oh, so fun. It was fast, it was challenging but not unfair, and the sensation of speed was uncanny. The second made some things better, some did not touch, and it was good and overall a very decent package, even if not a great game. So a third had to be a 10 out of 10 title, right? To fix all the small mistakes of the past and build on the rock-solid first game's quality. Well, it should be one, but it's not. In fact, I think it's rather disappointing. Not bad, mind you, just feeling like it was released 6 months too early, with not enough of QA testing along the way, and lacked those last few layers of polish, so to speak. It features 40 bikes and 15 tracks, which doesn't sound that bad, it's a solid set for a game like that after all, but previous entry had 32 of these tracks, day and night and reverse modes. And none of that is present in Moto Racer 3. There are no championship or career modes either, so despite there being quite a few other ones, mixing road and off-road racing, each and every race is just that, a singular race for points with no continuity. You do unlock newer and faster bikes by performing well, but that's it. There are no upgrades, no extra modes, race modifiers or even editor. What you see is what you get, and what you see is neither that great looking nor super fun to play. There is no denying though that the included game modes can be fun. The lack of feeling of progress or achieving something, however, makes this package feel rather blunt and unfinished. Is Moto Racer 3 a bad game? No, it's not, but sadly it's not a really good one either. It rides somewhere in the middle of the pack of numerous by 2001 motorbike racing games, never really gaining any traction or getting ahead of them. It's forgettable and arguably unnecessary. So while I don't like it, perhaps what you've seen here will make you wanna try it, and you may find something to enjoy in it for longer than 5 minutes. And if you do, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Fallout and Fallout 2, when they released, quickly became some of my most favorite games of the time, and truth be told, they are to this very day. They were these incredible post-apocalyptic adventures set in grim, retro future Western US that were as captivating to me as no other games in the RPG genre were before. I love them, I still do. So when Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel came out, my mind kinda sorta blanked the Tactics word from the title and focused on the Fallout one. Which was a mistake, and a big one at that, because while Fallout Tactics is not a bad game at all, it's not really a Fallout game that I wanted. Still, I did had some fun with it, even if I've never completed it. It's an offshoot of the main series, focusing on combat and forfeiting most of the RPG, leaving only very superficial parts of it in. Enough to trick you to begin playing, not enough to keep you in when you eventually realize that while the combat in the originals was fun, it was not what made them such phenomenal titles. So, while you do create your character in Tactics and it represents you, so when it dies the game ends, the game is not open-ended and rather a series of very linear missions. Missions for which you're briefed and can pick a squad of soldiers to accompany you on, keeping in mind particular soldiers' specialties and skills. All depending on the objectives at hand, which can be rescues, infiltrations, search and destroy missions and many others. The surviving characters earn XP, level up and get better. serving that aforementioned superficial RPG element to this otherwise entirely tactical challenge. The game can be played in new real-time mode or yours truly's favorite, turns, and that's precisely how I experienced the game. Though, from what I know about it, neither of the modes is superior to another and the game is equally as fun playing in either. There are easily over 100 weapons in Fallout Tactics and they can be purchased between missions for your squad to use. Each of them has different parameters, stuff like rate of fire, penetration, ammo use and the likes, and it's really fun having to pick the next few for your missions ahead, trying to foretell what they might require. Said missions range from real short ones to those that can take over an hour to complete, which is something that not everyone will appreciate, but I always found it fun, cause these longer ones, when beaten, felt really rewarding. Anyway, Fallout Tactics is set between the first two games and places you in the shoes of one of the Brotherhood of Steel members, whose airships were hit by lightning and storms and crash-landed near Chicago, and the plot of the game tells you a story from this point in time. Gothic is a third-person fantasy action RPG which has a very unusual but also captivating setting. It takes place in the so-called colony, so an area within a magical barrier, created by powerful mages around the mines to hold prisoners working in them captive. In time, the barrier grew out of control, the prisoners rebelled and killed the mages, and now they're living within, in three separate and independent, but working in cooperation with the outside world towns. The first is the Old Camp, which is set in the location of the mines and still mines expensive ores to sell to the king outside, all in exchange for the goods not available within the barrier. The second is the New Camp, a polar opposite to the earlier, where citizens live in anarchy, follow no rules and hope to find a way to blow up the barrier and leave the colony once and for all. And Brotherhood is the third, and they're the obligatory religious fanatics believing in a mysterious god called Sleeper, hoping that he will eventually release them. You know, stuff that will most definitely happen. Not. You play as a new convict, landing in the colony, unknowingly, a person who'll change the history and the entire Gothic's world. Killing enemies in combat rewards experience points, which when accumulated, increases your level, raise your HP and give you skill points. And with use of services of appropriate teachers, these skill points can be used to increase your attributes or learn completely new skills. These skills can be combat adjacent, it can be pickpocketing, lockpicking, but also basic harvesting or cooking too. Point is, there's plenty of them, and it's best to have a particular build in mind to do best in Gothic. I'd suggest picking whether you'll specialize in magic, ranged or melee combat, and pick and choose other skills to complement that choice later. You can join any of the 3 camps in the colony, and the choice influences most quests and plot points in the first part of the game. Eventually, however, whichever the choice you've made, the storyline will be identical for all of the picks. While the controls and combat can feel finicky every now and then, and Gothic is anything but polished, it's also one of the most innovative, well-written and complete RPG experiences of 2001, and a game every fan of the genre should play at least once. Pretty fun games, right? There's plenty more where these came from, so hopefully you'll enjoy all the episodes, as there's gonna be quite a few. Either way, whatever you think about it, please let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe share it too, it helps more than you know. If you didn't, then don't naturally. It was fun talking to you as usual, and I'll see you, or more accurately, talk to you very soon.
Any news?
Nah, everything's the same as ever.